Prologue. Coming out is more than a single act of disclosure. It is an always awkward, sometimes painful, iterative journey. I have come out again and again throughout my life. I first came out to myself, and even that happened a couple of times as I figured it all out. Then I came out to others. And I've been deciding almost daily to come out in any number of situations ever since. I've told sterilized versions of my coming out journey, suitable for work, for 20 years, but I've never told my true story from the beginning. My journey began when I was far too young. It was painful and difficult, and I paid many prices along the way as I found my true self. And I can say, 34 years after I fully came out in all aspects of my life, though it wasn't always easy, I'm so proud of the person I am and the work I did to get here. There are some things I wish had never happened, but I wouldn't be the man I am if they hadn't, and I love the person I've become. As people listen to these 4 episodes, I believe reactions will fall generally into 3 categories. 1. Listeners will fully lean in and be grateful for hearing such a complete, real-world, honest account of my experiences, and recognize others may benefit from hearing them. 2. Listeners may be angry and feel what I've shared was wholly inappropriate and entirely too much. 3. Listeners may be avoidant, uncomfortable, look away from the realities of my journey, and stop listening. Truth is not always comfortable. There are parents and children and families who need to know they are not alone. Social media has allowed people to take elaborate steps to curate a picture of their perfect, best lives. But no one's life is perfect. So here's to imperfection, and the growth and change it can bring once acknowledged and embraced. In case you missed it, this episode is marked explicit. There is no humorous story about saving a feral kitten. This is a story of finding and saving myself. If you're listening with young ears nearby, this is your chance to hit pause and come back later. If you don't want my opinion, Episode 5, Asked and Answered, by Carl Marking. As summer break approached, the year I was in 5th grade, many of my classmates seemed to have begun developing crushes on one another. I had apparently developed a crush too. "Why are you always looking at Mr. B?" one of my friends asked me in math class. "What do you mean?" "You're always watching him." Was I? I turned and looked at our teacher. He was in his late 20s or early 30s, had a dark complexion, a lean, well-muscled body, a thick head of black wavy hair, full lips, a cleft chin, and a full mustache. He always dressed in form-fitting polyester from head to toe, and had the hairiest forearms I'd ever seen on a man. "It's weird," my friend whispered harshly. "Stop being a fag." I was 11. At that age and during that time, if a peer called you a fag, it didn't always carry the derogatory sexual undertone used today to belittle someone who is actually gay. Many of us didn't fully understand what the word meant, and hurled it as a general insult like spaz or dork. We knew it was a harsher insult than most, and we'd heard it on TV where it most likely was meant in the derogatory, and specifically about someone's sexuality, but many of us were still putting all of that subtext together. Typically, when we called someone a fag at that age, we meant the person was behaving oddly in some way. I had heard the word faggot many times from my father. He kept a single-prop airplane at our local airfield, and used to use the word in reference to Jeff, a flamboyant man who worked there. His delivery of the word carried a dark undertone I didn't understand. Jeff was effeminate, but consistently kind to me, so I never thought much about it. I'd also heard my mother use the word. She'd come home from the bank and say something negative about that faggoty bank teller, Michael. He was also flamboyant, effeminate, and kind. He was a senior at our high school. I never understood why my mother so relentlessly tore him down. When I got home from school, I took out our well-worn dictionary with its white pleather cover, dropped it on the orange living room wall-to-wall carpet, and lay down on my belly. The dictionary was unabridged, which made it perfect for pressing flowers, and the one I'd put in earlier in the summer was now perfectly preserved. I flipped to the F's. Faggot. Noun. A bundle of twigs, sticks, or branches bound together. See also homosexual. That was a word I didn't recall hearing. Homosexual. Adjective. Pertaining to, characteristic of, or exhibiting homosexuality. A homosexual person. It was the next entry. Homosexuality. Noun. Sexual desire for others of one's own sex. Huh, I said aloud, and closed the dictionary. The definition resonated with me in a way I didn't fully understand, and my curiosity was now engaged. From that day on, any time my mother would say, "I'm going to the bank," I would stop whatever I was doing and go along. I wanted to find out all I could about this Michael person. By 8th grade, my peers and I were well into puberty. Our bodies were maturing at different rates, and the communal shower after gym class had become an exercise in finding somewhere neutral to rest one's gaze, avoiding eye contact, while simultaneously trying to check out each other's changing bodies. Crushes had become more serious, dating had begun, and being called a fag now had the full malicious and sexual context attached to it. I knew I was probably gay, but a war was raging within me between coming to terms with that reality and doing my best to alter it. There was no end to religious, familial, and social pressure to conform and be heterosexual. The message was clear. Gay was not okay. Unfortunately, I had fallen in love with my best friend, Bobby. He was everything I felt I wasn't. Popular, funny, comfortable in his skin, athletic, outgoing, and attractive. We spent most Saturday mornings bowling in a league together, and would watch the HBO movie of the week at his house Saturday nights. Being with him was both comforting and agonizing. I never talked about girls. I never engaged in conversations when peers were saying someone was beautiful. I was a husky, uncoordinated, and awkward kid. Inevitably, schoolmates would hurl the word fag at me, and because I now knew there could be some truth to it, that I could indeed be homosexual, it carried a heavier weight, and I felt as if they could see in me all the things I was struggling to extinguish. Even my obligatory poster of Farrah Fawcett I'd hung on my bedroom wall years earlier did nothing to alter the fact that deep inside, I knew that I was probably a homosexual. Because of that, and because it seemed to be expected, I started dating a girl in my grade. There was no emotional context to it other than I liked her as a person and thought she was smart and kind. I went through the motions hoping something would shift for me. We made out a few times. There was a very awkward 7 minutes in heaven moment, but there was no spark. Making out with her didn't light me up the way it did my friends when they'd talk about making out with their girlfriends. For me, it was nothing more than two tongues rolling around in each other's mouths while I wondered, how long do I have to do this before I can stop? My journey toward figuring out my sexual identity was made more confusing by the fact my brother had pimped me out to his friends when I was 7 years old in 1st grade. He was 12 and in 6th grade. I had shared with him one day while we were in the shower together that I had been fooling around orally with a friend of mine. He asked me what it was like. I thought about it for a moment. Have you ever licked your shoulder? You know how the skin is all smooth? It's like that. And for me, at that age, it was just like that. I was just doing age-appropriate exploration with a trusted friend and peer. And then the next thing I knew, my brother began coercing me into blowing his much older friends. This behavior continued until the summer before I entered 3rd grade. I was sitting on the curb in front of our house one afternoon, when the older brother of the friend I had been exploring with years earlier rode up to me on his bike. He said he'd heard I was giving blowjobs to other boys, and he and his friends wanted me to do it to them. I don't know what had changed for me or how I found the courage or strength, but I said no. He offered me money. Again, I said no. He threatened me, physically, and finally I shouted no, jumped up and ran into the house. Word of my refusal eventually got back to my brother, and he was furious with me. I don't know what he was getting out of it. Perhaps it was cash or some twisted social standing, but given his reaction, he was getting something out of it. After I'd refused, but before I could tell our parents what he'd been doing to me, he beat me to them and told them he'd heard I'd been having oral sex with my friend. Our mother went ballistic on me, while my brother stood off to the side, with a smug, satisfied smile on his face as he watched our mother's wrath rain down upon me. One would imagine a child's parents would have had any number of questions in that moment. How did this happen? Is Carl safe? How did Carl even know what oral sex is? Where did this happen? Should we talk to the other child's parents? How did Carl's brother learn this had happened? But our parents didn't ask a single question. The spotlight was fully on me and the shame and embarrassment I had brought upon my mother. "How could you do this to me?" she demanded to know. My father didn't say a single word. The next day, it was as if it had never happened. It was never discussed again, not by my parents, not by my brother, not even by his friends who had been involved. I held the abuse I'd endured in complete silence. During the years following that abuse, I suffered horrible depression and thoughts of suicide. I developed nervous tics. I began to put on weight, and I kept moving forward. So in 8th grade, when the kids at school called me a fag, it had the added weight of the secret I'd been carrying since I was 7. One Friday night, still in 8th grade, I had had a disturbing exchange with my father, and the next morning, as my sister and I watched TV in the basement, my mother called me upstairs. "Are you a faggot? Because if you are, we need to get you fixed." "No," I said. Our mother had once worked as a nurse in the psych ward of a VA hospital. She never spoke about her time there, and as someone who sought sympathy at every turn, I used to wonder what she had seen that was so horrifying, even she couldn't talk about it to use it to her advantage. This knowledge made me innately terrified as to what getting me fixed might look like. Her question was more accusation and threat than anything else, and reminded me of the night my brother threw me under the bus when I wouldn't let him pimp me out anymore. And just like that evening, all those years ago, the matter was dropped and never discussed again, and my suicide ideation returned. Eventually I made an appointment to see one of the middle school's guidance counselors. I was sleeping less, I wasn't comfortable at home, and I was making a mental list of all of my friends who had said their parents had guns in their home, as my thoughts of suicide started to develop into a plan. I needed help, and I had nowhere else to turn. The guidance office was across the hall from the main office where the principal, vice principal, and secretary sat. There was a waiting area and 2 counseling offices behind insulated metal doors, with small windows formed around sheets of chicken wire. Those doors did nothing to instill a sense of comfort in my heart. My counselor's office had 2 posters, one reading, "God doesn't make trash," and one of a kitten wedged in the crook of a tree, telling the reader to "hang in there, kitty." "So why are you here today?" she began. "I don't like it when the other kids call me fag." She leaned back in her chair, lit a cigarette, inhaled deeply, and forcefully blew the smoke toward the open window of her office. "Well, you're not, are you?" She leaned forward, rested her elbows on the edge of her desk, and gave me a penetrating stare. She wasn't so much asking a question as strongly suggesting I not be. "No, of course not. I just don't like it." I averted my eyes. I couldn't simultaneously look someone in the face and lie. I hated lying. "Because if you are, that's a conversation better had with your parents and the principal." She paused and continued staring at me, as the smoke from her cigarette curled around her head like a snake before being pulled lazily toward the open window. I think she was waiting for me to crack. When I didn't, she abruptly extinguished her cigarette. "Kids say all sorts of mean things," she concluded, and sent me back to class. Not long after that visit, a peer of mine, Milton, was summoned to the guidance counselor's office via the school's loudspeaker. He and I had had similar experiences growing up. We'd been in scouting together, we attended the same schools together, and we had abusive fathers, though his went out of his way to publicly shame and tear him down. His experiences showed me things could have been worse for me. It was a shitty way to find solace, evaluating the abuse he endured to feel better about my own. Not long after his summons over the loudspeaker, I heard him sobbing and screaming for help. I went to the open classroom window and watched as his father dragged him along the ground from the main entrance of the school, through the parking lot, toward their car. Anyone in a classroom at the front of the building could hear his cries for help. I could hear enough of his screaming to put together the gist of what had happened. He must have had a similar conversation with the counselor, only his must have ended with a more honest declaration of his truth. Milton's disclosure that he was gay went through the school like wildfire, and he was branded an outcast for the rest of his time in school. My heart went out to him, and I was terrified. Between my mother in the kitchen and Milton's experience at school, I kept my concerns about my sexual orientation to myself from that point forward. I made it my mission to try and not be gay. I became the only one of my siblings to go to all the school dances. I invested endless amounts of energy into being someone I wasn't, someone everyone else wanted me to be, and I was miserable, depressed, and constantly flirting with suicide. AIDS was all over the news now, and consistently presented in such a way that if you were a homosexual, then you were going to die from AIDS. AIDS was covered as if one led inevitably to the other. Being homosexual was a death sentence. AIDS kills fags dead was a common phrase at the time. Before AIDS, the media made me believe that if someone were homosexual, they were also, by default, a pedophile. There were no positive role models at the time. What few characters there were on TV or in movies were extreme stereotypes who ended up ridiculed, vilified, beaten, or killed. One positive thing TV did give me about the homosexual experience was a new word for fag, gay. Gay was used in a more neutral or accepting way. It may not sound like much, but it showed me a new perspective. Not everyone thought homosexuals were vile, and that small nuance gave me something hopeful to hold on to. My freshman year of high school, my sister was a senior and we attended the same school simultaneously. That fall I dated a girl, Diane, who I'd met through marching band. She tried on multiple occasions to get me to initiate sex, but I had no interest. In an attempt to permanently diffuse the matter, without making it about her, I told her I was saving myself for marriage. She dumped me soon after. I really cared for Diane as a person, and we were eventually able to salvage our friendship. Toward the end of the school year, our mother moved into the guest room adjacent to our bedrooms. Just before classes ended, she sat my sister and me down for a talk. "There's no easy way for me to say this," she said, fighting back tears. "But your father and I are getting divorced." We said nothing. She misinterpreted our silence and continued, "I know it's upsetting, but I thought it was time to tell you." Given our father's abusive, adulterous behavior, I was not upset. In fact, my initial reaction to the news of their divorce was a sense of hopefulness. I had lived in constant fear and shame, and the idea of being free of him sooner, rather than when I left for college, was fine by me. My sister looked at me, and almost in unison we expressed our relief at the news, saying things like, "Thank God," and "It's about time." Our mother looked surprised as we continued our feedback, and outlined how he'd beaten all of us, how he'd made her cry all the time, how exhausting the years of being yelled at had been, how embarrassing it was when neighbors of ours would ask us why our father screamed all the time, and we concluded by pointing out how miserable everyone had been, for years. She ignored our reaction, and went on to tell us how he was going to seal the second floor off from the first and convert it into an apartment. The outside door at the bottom of the staircase of the second floor would become the entrance to his part of the house. This news didn't go over as well. She went on to explain that in Maryland, if you had any children under 18, you had to be separated for a year before you could be granted a divorce. My sister had turned 18 a few months earlier, but I was 15 and still a minor. My sister shot me a look that said, "So this is your fault." I ignored it. Their plan was to live out their 1-year separation with our father upstairs, as the three of us lived downstairs. By dividing our single-family home into 2 apartments, he would satisfy the state's requirement for a legal separation. This also allowed them to run out the clock on their marriage in the cheapest possible way. "He's going to be living upstairs the whole time?" I asked. "Yes," she said, and started to cry. My sister and I didn't move as we waited for any other shoes to drop. "I hate crying," our mother said. "I'm so ugly when I cry." She had said this my whole life, and in that moment, for the first time, I wondered, who taught her to think that? Later that day, she finished moving the rest of her things out of their marital bedroom upstairs and into the spare room. It turned out they'd already hired attorneys and were fairly far along in their decisions. My father never said a word to me about the divorce, but by then he'd stopped interacting with me almost entirely. When I asked my mother about custody, she told me he didn't want any, not even visitation rights. She also told me she wasn't seeking child support. This news, delivered with no empathy or regard for my feelings, reinforced my sense of worthlessness. I shouldn't have been surprised. Years earlier, he'd written me out of his will, leaving me only $1 so there'd be no confusion. He was an ass, but at that age, I still wanted him to want to try and repair our relationship. But he'd made it clear, legally, he saw no value in me. Our family's summer tradition had always been to spend a week or two at our mother's parents' house. Her father had died the year before, but her mother kept their home. Given the impending divorce and my brother's general absence from the family, only our mom, my sister, and I would be going that year. The Saturday before we left, I spent the day at my part-time job, and when I came home, the doorway off the dining room to the second-floor staircase had been sealed. The spackle in the drywall was still wet. There was no advance notice that it would be happening that day, no discussion about it, no explanation for how or even if we were allowed to go upstairs anymore. I came home that day, and there was a wall where a doorway used to be. The house, their marriage, and our family were officially divided. One of the many friends I'd made my freshman year was Tony. We met in public speaking class. He was on the tennis team and asked if I'd like to play sometime. When I told him I didn't really know how to, he offered to teach me, and I said yes. As our friendship deepened, I would often spend the night at his house. My father's alcoholism and abusive behavior had always made it all but impossible for me to return such an invitation. But now that my parents and the house were separated, I was able to invite him over, and we made plans to that end. I brought a cot up from the basement so he wouldn't have to sleep on the floor. We spent an afternoon playing tennis, had a pizza for dinner, got cleaned up, and went to bed. Not long after, he pushed his cot against my mattress and asked if we could spoon. He began grinding his butt against my groin, which gave me an instant erection. At that age, friction equaled erection. I put my arm over his waist, and he took my hand and put it on his erection. This was a pivotal moment in my sexuality. I hadn't engaged in any consensual physical exploration with another boy since before my brother began pimping me out. Everything about the context surrounding Tony was different. I was in my mid-teens. I knew Tony. I liked Tony. We were both clearly aroused by those circumstances, and whatever was about to happen was consensual. Because of my prior experiences as to what sex was, and because sex with him seemed a natural extension of our relationship, I offered to blow him. "Yeah," he said. After a time, I stopped and asked if he wanted to blow me. "No," he said. I was crushed. Then, my embarrassment and shame arrived. I clearly had not misread anything about that moment, and couldn't understand what had just happened. He got out of his cot, pulled it away from my bed. I got up to use the bathroom. "Wow," he said, "you're really getting fat." More embarrassment and shame. The next morning while we were eating breakfast, I said, "About last night," and before I could say another word, he said, "I was drunk." "On what?" I asked. The only thing we'd drunk the night before was soda. Ignoring my question, he went into the living room to watch morning cartoons and changed the topic. Though we remained friends through high school, and though we would go on to have many sleepovers at his house, that situation never repeated itself, and we never spoke of it again. Bobby, who I'd become friends with in 8th grade, who I bowled in a league with, who I sang in choir with, who I spent many nights with at his house watching the HBO movie of the week, and who I'd had a crush on for years, had started dating a good friend of mine in band, Claire. One Friday night he called me. "I need a favor, and you're the only one I trust to do it," he said. "Okay, I'll be right over. Bring your camera." Okay. "And a flash cube." "Got it. See you in 10 minutes?" I arrived at his house and no one else was home. He took me downstairs to his rec room. "What's up?" I asked. "I want to do a nude picture and give it to Claire." "You want me to take a picture of you naked?" "Yeah, I think she'll find it either funny or sexy, so I can't lose." I was flooded with emotions and frozen in place. Though I didn't understand my feelings for him at the time, I had loved this kid since we'd been in 8th grade together. "Don't just stand there," he said, taking off his clothes. "My mom is going to be home soon, and I want to get this done before I lose my nerve." I still hadn't moved. "Carl, get your ass in gear. Hand me that blanket and get the camera ready," he shouted. I did as he directed. He put the blanket over himself, turned away from me, and shimmied out of his briefs. "Okay," he said. "Are you ready?" I put the flash cube on my camera and called back, "Ready." He turned around in such a way that he was facing me at a 45-degree angle in silhouette, wrapped in the blanket. Standing not 4 feet away, he threw his arms wide open and revealed himself to me. He stood there, stark naked and beautiful. He'd grown chest and pubic hair since the last time I'd seen him shirtless in a locker room. He had clearly defined pecs and quads and was fully erect and well endowed. I pulled my eyes away from his body and looked at his face, his beautiful face, with his hazel eyes and dark blonde hair. My entire being ached for him. My heart literally hurt as I stood there taking him in. "Take a picture, it will last longer," he laughed. And so I did. "Take another, just to be sure." And I did. 2 weeks later, I rode my bike to the mall and picked up the film from the photomat, terrified they would have flagged the pictures as being pornographic. When I got home, I went into my bedroom and opened the envelope. I held the pictures and admired him, again frozen in place. There is no doubt in my mind that our friendship, for him, was just that, a friendship. Knowing I would never be able to be with him in the way I wanted, I put the pictures of him back into the envelope and arranged to go to his house. "Let's see," he said. I handed him the pictures and the negatives. "Wow, she's going to love this. Do you think she'll love this?" he asked excitedly. "Sure," I said, and then told him I needed to go home. I don't remember how Claire reacted to the pictures, and my sophomore year came to a close. Soon after, my parents' divorce was final. My father bought my mother out of the house. His marriage license ran in the area's largest newspaper, as was the custom. And as my junior year was about to begin, my mother rented the first-floor apartment of a run-down 2-story house in one of the worst parts of town. The apartment reeked of cat urine and fuel oil, and the 2 women who lived upstairs turned tricks to pay the bills. The one bright spot that year was meeting Dan. We were in the same grade and had multiple classes together. He was centered, kind, funny, stick-thin, had the cheesiest mustache a teenager could have, his own car, and thought I was hysterical. He was great for my ego. Our first conversation began just before class started. I could feel someone staring at me and turned to look. There was Dan, staring at me with a neutral expression on his face. "Why staring at me?" I asked, uncomfortable by his direct gaze. "You're better to look at than the wall," he said flatly. We both laughed. That was all it took. We quickly became inseparable and would hang out in his finished basement on Friday or Saturday nights. His father would buy us wine coolers as a trade-off for knowing where we were. He figured if he didn't, we'd go to some party somewhere and end up drinking and driving. It kept us out of trouble, and at that age, we would have certainly gotten into trouble. My relationship with Dan was unlike any friendship I'd ever had. We just fit, like brothers. Everything about the time we spent together was effortless, and as our friendship deepened, we spent as much time together as we could. We'd hang out at the mall, see movies, go on drives to the county or day trips on weekends. Our friendship and bond just kept growing. Just before Christmas, there was a fire in the second-floor apartment of the house where my mother and I were living. We were displaced and moved in with a friend of my mother's and his family, the Labors. Mr. Labor used to live next door to my parents when they'd first bought the house I grew up in, and he and his family have remained friends of my mother ever since. 2 weeks later, on New Year's Eve, the grocery store where Bobby and I now worked exploded just after close. No one was hurt. That February, my mom bought a new house in a neighborhood adjacent to our old one. Once again, my life was full of trauma, and I did my best to keep my head down while doing everything in my power to seem perfectly normal. I was still going to every dance I could, and would ask girls who were just friends to come with me. I refused to date any one particular girl, because I didn't want anyone to be collateral damage to the lie I was living regarding my sexual orientation. The summer between my junior and senior year, now that my father was out of the picture, I became more present in my body. I went on a diet, started walking, cycling, and continued to play tennis with Tony. I dropped 50 pounds in 3 months. I started my senior year looking and feeling better than I'd felt since I was very young. As the weather warmed and graduation approached, Dan and I would sometimes drink wine coolers at night, as we wandered around a large, undeveloped area of scrub near my house known by the locals as the Ditch. It ran along the highway beside my old and new neighborhoods. Occasionally another friend of ours, who lived in another development within walking distance of mine, would tag along. The three of us stayed out drinking well beyond my mother's usual bedtime, so we could crash at my place after she'd gone to bed. "Shit," I said, noticing the living room light was on as we approached my house. I tried the doorknob. "It's locked and I don't have my keys. I think my mother's awake." The door suddenly flew open. The three of us were standing in a clump opposite the door. I was in the middle, Dan was to my left, and our friend was slightly behind us and to my right. "Hello, Mom," I slurred. "Are you drunk?" She was more incredulous than angry. It was the first time she'd ever seen me drunk. Our friend dropped his wine cooler and it shattered on the walkway. "Yup," I said proudly. Despite her best effort to stay angry, she started laughing, caught herself, and tried desperately to swing back to righteous indignation. "Well, you're not staying here. You can sleep somewhere else tonight," she said, and slammed and locked the door. Our friend fell backward onto the front lawn, laughing uncontrollably. Dan and I picked him up, propped him between us, and shuffled over to his house to crash. One Friday night a couple of weeks later, just Dan and I repeated the routine. We were drinking California coolers as we walked along a well-worn path at the Ditch, under a full moon. "I love you, Dan." "I love you too." "No, I mean, I'm in love with you." He processed this in silence as we walked along the path. "Wait, what? How can you be in love with me? You've gone to more dances with girls than I have." "I think I might be gay." "Gay for me or gay? I don't know." We walked in silence for a bit, passing the last wine cooler back and forth between us. "I just want to be with someone I love who loves me too," I said. "I do love you," he said, "but I'm not gay." "We've swapped this wine cooler back and forth so much," I said, "we're practically making out right now." He laughed so hard he doubled over and stopped walking. Once he'd gotten himself back under control, he took a drink and passed it back to me. We started walking again. "I don't know if I'm gay. I just know I want to be with you." "What? How? You are with me. What does that mean?" I didn't really have an answer, and we walked along in silence. "Let me blow you," I said. "What?" "Let me blow you." We passed the wine cooler back and forth between us. "Come on," I said. "Let me do it. I love you, and I know you've never had a blowjob." "Come on, stop asking me that." "Why?" He stopped walking and turned to face me. "Because if you keep asking me, I may say yes." The moment held. "So say yes." He slowly turned away and started walking again. It would change everything in our relationship, and I don't want that to happen. I do love you, but it would just make things weird. I'd rather have my best friend than a blowjob. I took the wine cooler from him, finished it, and threw the bottle as far into the scrub as I could. "Okay then," I said. We walked along in silence, intentionally bumping into each other to lighten the mood, and eventually started back toward my house. We never talked about my offer again. It fell into an unspoken category of asked and answered, and never became an uncomfortable presence in our friendship. We simply moved forward. Aside from that night with Dan, my senior year was unremarkable. On the personal front, I'd kept the weight off. Academically, I realized my grades weren't good enough to get a scholarship to any of the colleges I had hoped to attend, and I didn't want to be saddled with debt. My only chance of getting a scholarship to a decent four-year college would be by attending the local community college and getting my grades up. I applied and was accepted. After graduating from high school, I bought myself a used car, started working at the college's computer lab, and enjoyed the absolute sense of freedom that came with having my own wheels. The car was an absolute lemon. The cruise control never worked, the AC constantly had to be recharged, the shoulder belt wouldn't lock in place if you slammed on the brakes, and one day, the mechanism that held the back of the seat in place failed. It's an underappreciated mechanism, and I didn't have the abs to hold myself up, so I wedged a textbook behind the driver's side seat back and the back seat cushion. Eventually I got the dealership that sold me the thing to fix the harness and the seat back as safety issues. Diane called me one day that summer and invited me to meet her at the county fairgrounds for a horse race. The weather was perfect. Blue skies, a gentle breeze, low humidity. We walked around the grounds among the crowds. "I have to confess something to you," she said. "I have an ulterior motive for inviting you here. I want to introduce you to someone." I was immediately annoyed. As I prepared to enter college, I had finally begun to dial back the energy I was investing in being what everyone else wanted me to be. "I've noticed you haven't dated anyone since you and I split up, and I think you'll like this person," she said. I was going to mention all the girls I'd taken to the various school dances, but we both knew I hadn't dated any of them. "Diane, really, I appreciate it, but you don't have to play matchmaker for me. I'm not really interested in—" "Oh, over there," she interrupted. I followed her gaze, but no one jumped out at me. "Pip, over here," she called, and from behind a small group of people, a man, several years older than us, waved and started walking over. "Diane, what are you doing?" "Trusting a hunch." Pip arrived in front of us. "Carl, Pip. Pip, Carl." He offered his hand in a warm, toothy smile. "Hi," he said. "Diane tells me we may have a few things in common." I took his hand and shook it. It was strong, calloused, and when I went to let go, he held my hand just a moment longer than I expected, then released me. I felt myself blush. "I'll leave you to it," Diane said. "Carl, find me in the stands when you're ready to go," and she melted into the crowd. Judging by his tan, Pip clearly worked outside. He had straight brown hair with golden highlights from the sun. It was parted down the middle with just a bit of a feather on either side. He had brown eyes, a strong nose, and a spade-shaped chin. His direct eye contact was mesmerizing. Although I didn't remember him from high school, he had graduated with my sister when I was a freshman. "It's okay. I don't remember you either," he said. "I wasn't on campus much my senior year. I did the work release program." We walked around the fairgrounds and made small talk for about 15 minutes when he stopped and faced me. "Here's my number." He pulled a slip of paper out of his pocket and offered it to me with his right hand. I reached for it. As I was about to take it from him, he placed his left hand on the back of my right, holding it still in midair, and then gently placed the paper in the palm of my hand. The gesture left him holding my hand in both of his, surrounded by people, in broad daylight. I was transfixed, staring at our hands. Then he cleared his throat and I looked him in the eyes. "Call me sometime. I work here at the fairgrounds, in the stables. I have access to them, day or night. He paused, still holding my hand in his. I'd be happy to show you around some night. I couldn't move. He smiled, released my hand, and I took a deep breath, not realizing I'd stopped breathing once he'd touched me. And the moment was broken. Good to meet you, Pip. I'll give you a ring. And just as quickly as he'd appeared, he was gone. I called him the next day. I got his answering machine and left my number. After some back and forth, we connected. I don't remember where we'd agreed to meet, but it was a beautiful, clear summer night, and after we'd wrapped up whatever it was we'd meant to do, he asked if I'd like to see the fairgrounds. It's beautiful in the starlight, he said, and there's never anyone around this late. I'd love to show you. I followed him in his Yugo for the 30-minute drive to the fairgrounds, and my entire body was tingling. When we arrived at the gate to the grounds, he got out of his car and opened it. We drove through a low-cut field of grass that slowly climbed a small hill which overlooked the track. He was right. It was beautiful. There wasn't a single cloud, just a half-moon, no light pollution, and a sky full of stars. There was a warm breeze, laced with the smell of honeysuckle and horse manure. We leaned on the hood of his car. He lit a cigarette, and we made small talk. It was well past midnight. My body temperature suddenly dropped, and I started shaking. Are you cold? He asked. It wasn't the temperature, it was anticipation. Nervous, I said. About what? You? He stood up. I followed suit. He turned to face me. I did the same. He moved within a few inches of my face. And why would I make you nervous? I could smell his cologne, Paul Sebastian, and his cigarette, Benson and Hedges. Well, and before I could finish the sentence, he placed his strong, calloused right hand on the nape of my neck and gently pulled me toward him. He tilted his head, closed the distance between us, and pressed his mouth to mine. As soon as his tongue entered my mouth, my entire body lit up. Every nerve felt electrified from his kiss, which was the perfect blend of pressure, friction, and investigation. The nicotine on his tongue gave mine a little jolt. His cologne, the distant horses, the honeysuckle, the warm breeze. It could not have been a more perfect first kiss. I didn't move. The moment lasted forever and only for an instant. He stepped back. My entire body was vibrating. So that's what a kiss is supposed to feel like, I thought. In that moment, I knew I wanted that. More of that. All of that. I got my bearings and said, I should be getting home. Did I do something wrong? He asked. God, no. That was amazing. Well, good for Diane. She wasn't sure, but I knew when I met you, he said. Knew what? That you were gay. I must have gotten a look on my face. Aren't you? I don't know. That's the first time I've ever kissed a guy. And? He asked, smiling. It was more than I expected. I've never felt anything like that with anyone else I've ever kissed. You're an excellent kisser. I'd like to do it again if you're interested. Oh, I'm interested. He leaned in to kiss me, and once again, my entire nervous system lit up, and I was shaking. He pulled back and looked me in the eyes. You okay? Yes, I lied. I was unsteady on my feet. We parted company, with a mutual understanding we'd meet again soon. We continued to see one another throughout the summer. Each time he wanted to have intercourse, and each time I said I wasn't ready. Then one night, at my house, when my mother was out of town, he came over, with liquor. I thought it would be fun to get you properly drunk, he said, since you don't have to drive home. Every time I looked away, my glass would be refilled, and I quickly lost count of how much alcohol I had consumed. He wasn't drinking at all. Once I was drunk, he got me into my bedroom and took from me what I hadn't been willing to give him. He raped me, as I begged him to stop. I had no one to tell about what had happened to me. There weren't even legal protections for man-on-man sexual assault at the time. The police would have ridiculed me for the homosexual aspect of it. My mother had made it clear years earlier that she wasn't an ally. I didn't tell Diane because I believed she would have internalized the incident and unnecessarily carried guilt over having introduced us. I didn't want to do that to her. I carried my secret in silence and spent the next 6 months worrying about whether or not he'd given me AIDS. That's how long it took at the time for AIDS tests to reliably register the HIV antibodies. I lived in fear, once again hiding who I was as a person. After my rape, but before I started at the community college, Diane and I were joyriding on the back roads of Pennsylvania one night. It was raining, a deer jumped in our path, I swerved, hit a pothole, lost control of the car, hit a guardrail, and flipped the car down an embankment and into a stream. We were both okay, but the car was totaled. As I started the fall semester of my freshman year of college, I never talked about my sexual identity. I let people assume what they wanted. I was fully back in the closet and doing my best to keep my shit together. I originally got to classes by bumming rides and occasionally borrowing my mother's car. Then out of the blue, my maternal grandmother offered to buy me a new car. As part of my financial aid package to the community college, I worked in the computer lab. There were 4 of us in all, acting as proctors and tutors to other students. Ginger, who reminded me of a heavier version of Stevie Nicks, always dressed in flowing skirts with roach-clip feathers in her long brunette hair. Lance, who was stick-thin, rarely wore deodorant, and barely said 3 words in a day, but when he did speak, he was incredibly funny. And Carrie, who was Pentecostal. She wore no makeup or perfume, had simple wire-rimmed glasses, and dirty blonde hair down to her hips. We were an awkward and unlikely group, but formed friendships nonetheless. Carrie and I took classes together, studied together, worked together, and often ate lunch and dinner together. Lance became the first guy friend I'd had in years that I had absolutely no romantic interest in. He carried a heaviness about him that seemed to prevent him from making friends, as it came off as though he was aloof or brooding. He too struggled with severe bouts of depression. I could relate to his issues, and as such, saw through them to the funny, kind, and deeply lonely person he was underneath. Like Dan, we had become something closer to brothers. He loved to wrestle with me, and we'd hang out together at his parents' house. I came to realize it was probably the only physical contact he had with another human being, and read nothing more into it. Ginger was second in command at the lab, was 11 years older than me, had her own home, and became like a sister. Most Friday or Saturday nights, some combination of the 4 of us would hang out at her house, watching TV, eating pizza, and enjoying one another's company. Ginger's mother, Grace, a kind, funny, and insightful woman, would occasionally join us as well. I somehow managed to do great academically in my freshman year of college. I left high school with barely a C average, and was on track to finish the semester with almost straight A's. As my final year of community college was wrapping up, I was on track to graduate with honors, and had secured a full scholarship to Towson University, where I was going to major in secondary education mathematics. But first, I had to ace my programming class. The final project was worth 50% of my grade. It was 9 o'clock in the evening, the last day of finals week, and the cutoff time to submit our projects. Ginger, Carrie, Lance, and I were in the lab. They had submitted their projects and were impatiently waiting for me to do the same. "We have to get out of here," Ginger said. "The security guard has been in here twice and wants to lock the building down so he can go home. If you haven't figured it out yet, it's unlikely you will tonight." "I can't fail this project," I said. "I get that, and you won't, but you need to step away from it." She then called Henry, our professor. "He said you have the weekend to turn it in." "Well, that doesn't seem fair to everyone else," I said. "Call it a perk of working in his lab, being his TA, and getting an A on literally everything you've ever done in his classes for 2 years. I decided I could live with that. "Okay, everybody," Ginger declared. "We're packing it in and we're going to my house to celebrate the end of the semester and the end of our time working in the computer lab." We were all graduating and moving on with our lives. We left the lab and headed to Ginger's. She had stocked her fridge with soda for Carrie, who didn't drink, and beer for the rest of us. As we waited for the pizzas to be delivered, I continued to obsess over what I was missing that prevented my program from compiling. The pizza arrived, and after a couple of beers and several slices, I had to pee. Everyone was hanging out in the living room, and the bathroom was at the top of the adjacent staircase. As I finished peeing, the error with my program revealed itself. I had reversed 2 lines of code. "I figured it out!" I shouted. I heard a tired, half-hearted cheer of support from the living room below. As I washed my hands, I looked at myself in the mirror, making eye contact with my reflection. I hated making eye contact with myself in the mirror. The abuse I endured growing up had long ago caused my mind, spirit, and body to disconnect from each other. Each carried different pieces and memories of my history, but in isolation. It was an innate coping mechanism that allowed me to survive my trauma. Making eye contact with myself in a mirror threatened a connection between these segregated parts of myself and always made me uncomfortable. I looked into my blue eyes, and in that moment, connected briefly with my pain, fear, sorrow, fatigue, and loneliness, and said to my reflection, I figured it out. I'm gay. It was the first time I'd said those words aloud as a definitive statement, and as soon as they left my lips, I felt the weight of my struggle lift from my spirit. And just as quickly, I felt a rush of shame and self-loathing. Although my AIDS test after my rape came back negative, I firmly believed, because of the endless messaging from the media and from the pulpit, that if I were gay, I would die of AIDS. I also believed from the same sources and my father that if I was gay, I would be a pedophile. And so my first thoughts, after having said the words out loud to myself, were, I don't want to be a pedophile. I don't want to die from AIDS. Lance, Carrie, and Ginger were saying their goodbyes. I left the bathroom and went downstairs. Carrie called out, I'm glad you figured it out. What? I asked, afraid she'd somehow overheard me coming out to myself in the bathroom mirror. The error. I'm glad you figured it out, she said. Oh, thanks. Ginger and I were alone. What was the error, she asked. What did you figure out? That I'm gay, I said and began to sob. Loud, uncontrollable, snot-filled, body-shaking sobs. Oh my, she said and moved in to hug me. Let it out. It's okay. I had a soul-cleansing release of long-held sorrow and stress. I cried for all the stereotypes I thought I'd have to embrace. I cried from the toll the secret had taken on me. I cried out of fear for what my life would be like. I cried for what Pip had done to me. When I'd finally cried myself out and caught my breath, Ginger took a step back and asked, Are you okay? I feel a bit of everything at the moment, but yeah, I'm okay. I feel lighter. She went into the kitchen, returned with a glass of water, handed it to me, and we sat on the sofa in silence. After a while she said, I owe my mom $5. Why? She told me the first time she met you she thought you might be gay. Is it that obvious? No, not at all. She's just really good at that for some reason. I felt unsafe that someone had seen in me that which I'd spent so much energy and time trying to hide. For what it's worth, she thinks you're an amazing person and won't care. And neither do I. You're one of the kindest people I know. You're fantastic, and don't let anyone, not even you, tell you differently. Okay. What's next? She asked. How do you mean? What are you going to do with this insight? Nothing. I just needed to say it out loud. I needed to tell someone I trust. I've been struggling with this since 5th grade. How did this come up in 5th grade? It was the first time anyone had called me a fag. I went home, looked it up in the dictionary, eventually landed on homosexual, and I knew then that was probably what I was. I won't tell anyone about this, not even my mother. This is your story to tell. Thanks. I'm going to head home. I'm beat. Free advice? she asked as I opened the door. I nodded. Be careful who you tell. Once you tell someone something, you have no control over where that information will travel. I drove home vacillating between fear and relief the whole way. Epilogue. I'm fascinated by the reactions of friends of mine who have children if I reference the physical exploration I did in elementary school with peers. Such behaviors begin at a remarkably early age, but it's as if we develop a blind spot around how young we were at the time. Such consensual explorations are normal, age-appropriate behavior. They are not indicators of anyone's future sexual orientation. They are innocent curiosity and how we learn about our bodies. Touch feels good. Contact feels good. Connection with another person feels good. I clearly remember coming home from elementary school one day in 4th grade and having my first "I'll show you mine if you show me yours" experience with a girl. We were the same age and friends. It was her idea. The whole thing happened alongside a neighbor's house, out of sight by their trash cans, and lasted less than a minute. Neither of us was particularly impressed, and we continued home, never to discuss it again. That is not to make light of what my brother did to me. The boys my brother pimped me out to left me feeling soiled and used. Those exchanges were about power and control. I don't understand how I survived it, other than I had some innate coping mechanism. It wasn't fortitude, it wasn't character, it was at best resilience and luck. I included the story of my experiences at the direction of my brother because they were a core aspect of my coming out journey. They made everything so much more difficult, so much more confusing. They polluted my understanding of my sexuality with tremendous guilt and shame. For years I thought those events at my brother's direction were the reason I was gay, but I eventually learned such experiences are not how one's sexual orientation is determined. It took me years of therapy as an adult to pick apart and separate the emotional aspect of those two sets of experiences, my consensual curiosity from the abusive adulteration. I have met many men of all orientations who have had similar experiences at a young age at the hands of family members or trusted people in their lives. Though they are capable of acknowledging it happened, many are too often incapable of discussing it or seeking therapy, which has left them carrying deep shame for something that happened to them at an age they had no ability to stop it from happening. At least 1 in 6 men are survivors of sexual abuse, and there are precious few voices able to share their experiences, because it is painful and can be somewhat re-traumatizing to do so. I'm proud of the work I've done that allows me to be someone who can share his experience, in the hope that it may help someone else with theirs. It is for them that I chose not to redact my experiences from this story. Silence does not lead to progress. In 1st grade, we only know what we know. It isn't until we gain experience, or are exposed to the ideas and experiences of others, that we can measure our lives against a different standard. I suppose that is why so many people are hell-bent on controlling what books, and by extension, what ideas children can access. God forbid a child, trapped in some horrible situation, brainwashed by their parents, or church, or local culture, reads of an alternative state of existence, and realizes something could be better with their own. Milton gets far less room in this story than he deserves. We weren't friends, but his life was an endless tangent to mine all through school. His father was just like mine, but with less self-control in public. Milton would go on to commit suicide. I think about him all the time, and wish he'd found a better fate. I hope in the end he at least found peace. What happened to him as a child all those years ago is still happening to kids today. Bobby. I loved that kid with all my heart. We had so much fun together just being around one another. We worked together at 2 different places in our lives, a Hardee's and the grocery store that blew up when we were in high school. Claire eventually came out as a lesbian. The evening I made a pass at Dan, I'd never received a kinder, more thoughtful rebuke. My pass at him never came between our friendship, which is what being secure in one's masculinity and sexual orientation looks like. He was flattered, curious for a brief moment, but it wasn't what he wanted from my friendship, and we simply moved on from there. There's much more to my rape, but this isn't that story. I almost didn't include the fact of it, as I know it's upsetting. But as with my brother's behavior, to exclude it would be to deny another core part of my coming out experience. Meeting Pip, having my first kiss under the stars, with my nose filled with honeysuckle, cigarette smoke, and his cologne. It was beautiful, and I refused to let his ultimate rape take the beauty of that moment from me, which took a lot of therapy. Although some will tell you differently, we never fully recover from trauma. It's an unrealistic expectation to place on oneself or on others that you can. The best we can do is make the most of the trauma and do the work to own it rather than have it own us. The journey is the thing, and the questions are sometimes more helpful than the answers. Then there's Ginger and her mom, Grace. Ginger was literally a lifesaver to me. There is so much more to her story that made her willing and able to be there for me in the ways she was. She was kind, insightful, and generous. But more than anything else, she was present. Sometimes all someone needs of us is for us to be present for them, to see them, to hear them, to validate them, to reassure them. Be an ally. Be someone's just the right person at just the right time. Be the buoy in the waters of someone's life.